Good evening and shalom and blessings to you all. This is a Watchdog episode, so thank you for joining. Want to go ahead and give a little bit of time for people to actually come in, of course, and so we can get this stream out. If you guys are currently here, please do throw that likes, that thumbs up if you're a consistent fan. Share this out to your friends so we can get people to actually watch and partake in this information. So on and so forth. I'm sure you guys know the drill by now, but thank you very much for being here today for this episode of the Watchdog. Typically, we are posting Watchdogs on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We did not end up getting one last Friday, and I also neglected to get one up yesterday. So I figured, got to get one this Tuesday. There's a ton of information that we need to be talking about. So nonetheless, here we are today, and I appreciate you guys joining. So first things first, before we get into any of the articles, of course, we want to go ahead and have a brief discussion. And there's actually multiple things that I want to bring up in this brief discussion that I didn't feel I would have the time to go into deep articles on, but I feel like they are important. The first thing I wanted to mention is those of you who watch the show consistently may know that I am very involved in the in the whole anti-pornography thing. Well, Pornhub, after initially saying that they were doing everything perfectly fine, that there was no possibility that anybody was going to be abusing their system and getting, images of trafficked people or minors or things like that, now has actually recanted that and removed over 10 million videos from their service, believing them to be unverified videos. So obviously that's a positive thing. It's not the only thing that we need. I actually, a lot like Matt Walsh, would take the position that we should quite literally be throwing them in prison for the rest of their lives, if not executing them, frankly. They made billions of dollars off of child sex trafficking, for crying out loud. However, that is not in our jurisdiction. It is in Canada's jurisdiction, so there's not really anything we can do about it. That said, it is definitely a good thing to see them, reneging on their obviously bogus position that they put forward earlier, that they were actually doing everything that they could to protect from this sort of thing. And also to see them actually deciding we're going to remove this content. We're going to make sure that this content is not monetized, that it's not put out there in the public sphere. It obviously does go to show that they can't be trusted, because they just literally a week ago were saying, no, everything's fine, nothing to see here, move along, yada, yada. But nonetheless, the public pressure was put on the world's largest pornography company, the largest smut company in the history of human civilization. And we managed to get them to capitulate without getting the law involved at all. So I'm actually very impressed with that. I very much like that information. Hopefully, we will see greater developments than this. Obviously, we're never going to see the eradication of pornography. We're probably never even going to see pornography become something that is not very well known, right? In other words, it's popular. It will be popular from now until the dawn of time. It's just the way it is. Sex sells, unfortunately. Barring some kind of great revival, which, God could actually, of course, have that happen here. But barring something like that, it's just simply not going to go away. But we could at least get society to a point to where we understand it's not a good thing, where we understand that it's not something that should be in the public sphere, where we understand maybe it needs to be very, very highly regulated. And I think we're seeing a little bit of a step in that direction with these recent developments. Like I said, obviously not going far enough, in my opinion. The CEO, COO, even some of the stockholders, if they are a public company, I'm not really sure. But the people who are at the top of Pornhub need to go down. They need to be arrested. They need to be charged with child sex trafficking and whatever else they can be charged with, because I'm not even sure on what exactly the particulars of the law are there and like what you can charge people with. But it is nice. I mean, like I said, 10 million videos removed. That is a lot of content, right? Who knows how many hours that actually amounts to, but 10 million videos, that is an awfully large amount of content. They're also now requiring that you do have to be, I guess, verified to upload content. Numerous people like Fight the New Drug have pointed out that doesn't mean a whole lot. You could actually quite literally be under the age and still manage to get verified. It's not a hard system to beat. But like I said, they are, steps in the right direction, even if they're not what we're going for. And we do need to continue to push for what we're going for, right? We're not compromisers here. We're not going to say, oh, yeah, that was good, therefore we're going to sleep. No, we need to try and get people to understand all of the evils about this absolutely disgusting industry and this absolutely repulsive company, right? But that doesn't mean that we can't rejoice in the victories that we have. Second thing that I did want to point out, and by the way, I did notice some people here in the chat, Shalom, Jeremy, Honesty Angel, and Nightmare. I do happen to agree with this, so I'm going to highlight it. They won't be charged with anything as long as Trudeau is prime minister. That's 100% accurate. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, not only does he have absolutely no spine, but he's actually incredibly progressive. And as those of us who live in any Western country are very familiar with at this point, for whatever reason, the progressives are real big on the whole sex thing, right? On one end, they want to say that women are objectified, which I even agree with. And then on another end, they'll start to, push forward people like Amber Rose and Cardi B, but whatever, not really the point, right? I do happen to agree with that, though. It's going to be a while before Pornhub gets charged, if they do get charged. Other thing, though, I did want to mention, besides that, there was an actress, at least I guess. I mean, she was in something sometime in her life. But there's an actress. Her name is actually completely fleeting me. I think it's Messing, Deborah Messing. She's in something. I don't really know. There's so many of these unimportant, self-righteous celebrities in the world that I don't care after a while, right? The reason that this particular woman is of note at the moment, Deborah Messing, is because she actually decided that she wanted to tweet that she hoped not only that President Donald Trump would be arrested after he left office, but also that he would live very long, but exclusively in prison, and that he would, quote, become the most popular boyfriend to all of the inmates there. Now, of course, I'm pretty sure I don't have to explain what exactly that joke means, right? And, not that we're calling for any sort of a cancellation or anything like that, right? We're not part of this whole cancel culture thing. It's disgusting, of course. A society which actually validates that kind of behavior and rhetoric is a society which is doomed to damnation, both spiritual and physical, in my own personal opinion. But that's not the point, right? We're not in the business of cancel culture. But what is the point is two things. Number one, the fact that she said it. She said that she wants President Donald Trump to go to prison and become the most popular boyfriend, to be passed around like some kind of a blow-up doll, basically, right? That is her wish for the President of the United States. That's obviously very hateful. I'm more than positive that had the President of the United States said that he wanted that for Deborah Messing, that he would potentially be kicked off of Twitter. People might be wanting to see if he could be charged with some level of hate crime or harassment or libel or whatever, right? They'd be throwing anything that they possibly could at him. You'd have people talking about it on Certainly Not News and CBS and on Fox even. They might even get on to Newsmax. Alex Jones might have to reference it. Everybody's going to be, going on about it 2 years from now even. But she goes ahead and does it. And the only thing that actually ended up being controversial outside of conservative circles, because of course conservative circles called her out for the fact that she was literally calling for the essentially the gang rape of the president, right? But outside of conservative circles, that wasn't the outrage. You want to know what the outrage was? Well, it was that it was homophobic, you see. It's mean to the LGBTQ community. And she had to make an apology about how the strong password people were so offended and how she's an ally, which of course is completely freaking retarded. I hope you will excuse my language there, but I have absolutely, I mean, if that's something that you were on board with, I just want you to know you have immediately dropped down to the zero level of respect as far as I'm concerned, right? There's no respect for that kind of a position. If you're looking at this tweet and your response is, this might hurt some fruit's feelings because he doesn't know how to be a man or she doesn't know how to be a big woman and put her big boy girl or big girl panties on, right? If that's actually your position here, then literally crawl in a hole and die, you useless waste of space. I'm sorry to be so harsh about it, but I cannot believe the level of disgusting, abhorrent moral fabric, quote unquote, in these liberals. It blows my mind. This is not the first time, right, that something like this has occurred. Let's recall that Kathy Griffin was posting images of literally severing the president's bloody head off. Let's remember, I can't remember the name, but some famous Hollywood actor had once said that he wanted Barron Trump to be locked in a cage with a bunch of pedophiles. Barron Trump was 10 years old at the time, my friends. Let's remember all of this. Let's remember that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, just, what, a month ago, maybe 2 months ago? How long ago was the election? November 3rd? A little bit over a month ago? Just a month ago was calling for a crew of people to monitor and potentially even round up people who supported Trump. I mean, this is what the left is. I'm sorry. If you deny it, you're either lying to yourself or you're lying to the public. It's one of those two things. At this point, it can't be stupidity. Nobody is that stupid. I don't even think it can be ignorance because it's blasted on literally every single media outlet in the entire world, whether they be news or entertainment. They could be talking about music. They could be on YouTube. They could be in the big business. It doesn't matter. They're all propagating the same crap, even the so-called quote unquote conservatives, right? There is absolutely no way that you're not aware of this at this point. And yet you continue to support it. You continue to be okay with these people. You continue to vote in the direction that allows these people to get more power, that allows them not only to get more power in the fact that they are in these positions of president, of governor, of what have you, right? But in the fact that they are actually gaining more power, right? The government gets bigger. They have the ability to do things they did not previously have the ability to do. You listen to these celebrities as if they're gods, right? As if they're Greek heroes, descendants of the demigod Hercules or something like that. They're about to go slay the Hydra for you, when in reality, they poorly lie, right? Because that's what acting is. You're lying. I'm just being honest. You're a professional liar. It's not that impressive. Literally anybody can do it. So, I mean, I don't know what to do with that, because then we get to the last thing I want to talk about before we get to articles, and that is this question that's been going around about secession. And I don't want any part of a nation that includes Kathy Griffin's and AOC's and whatever this moron's name was, Deborah something or whatever, right? Messing or something. I don't want to live in a country with you. I don't like you. You're not my countrymen. Frankly, I have no interest in what happens on your side of the table, right? I find you to be an enemy, if I'm being honest. I find you to, like, just as much of an enemy as I find the communist Chinese, I find the Democratic Party at this point. And I don't see how there's anything that, like, is unrational on my side here, is unreasonable on my side here. What do you expect, right? When you forget all of this stuff about COVID lockdowns and forced vaccinations and potentially stealing the election and all that, forget all of that, right? Let's just agree for the sake of argument that that is all right-wing talking point and conspiracy theory, okay? At what point does your rhetoric become so severe? At what point do we hear enough, hey, I want such and such a person to be gang raped, quote unquote jokes, right? At what point do we hear enough of those for us to be justified in saying, look, I don't want to share a country with you. You're not my countrymen. You're not my kin. I'm sorry. That's just the way, that's the way it is, okay? There is nothing that ties me to, for example, California. I don't share the same culture as you. I don't share the same religion as you, the same philosophies as you, the same political views as you. We don't even share the same definition of the Constitution, for crying out loud. As the Raging Atheist just showed us, and as numerous other liberals have said throughout the last couple decades, right? But on my last open room, right, as he had very, very clearly stated, the Constitution isn't something he thinks we should be beholden to. Maybe we should relook at this whole thing about the First Amendment. Maybe we should relook at this whole thing about the Second Amendment. Maybe a militia is not a whole good idea, so on and so forth, right? That's what they believe. At what point does that become a big enough divide for us to say, I am not interested, and be justified? I personally think it was like 50 years ago, and I'm not exaggerating. Like, the second we started saying there's a culture war, we should have been talking about an amiable separation, right? We didn't. And now there's potentially going to be violence. Who knows? We'll see what happens. I can't predict the future. But I mean, I don't understand the argument for staying united at this point. I really don't. And I think this particular tweet and the fact that the response to it wasn't, hey, maybe don't make jokes about gang raping the president. It was, hey, using the word boyfriends might be offensive to some fruitcake somewhere, right? And I'm sorry to be so offensive to you, but that particular kind of gay person, I have absolutely no respect for whatsoever, and I never will. You won't make me. But I mean, like, this tweet just totally encapsulates why I think there is no point in unity. We're not unified. We never will be unified again. We have not been unified for quite some time. The reason 9/11 was such a big deal for everybody, right? In the sense that, like, people always talk about, oh, I remember 9/12 and we all came together, right? Well, the fact that we all came together after 9/12 and sort of dropped all of this contention sort of implies there was a bunch of contention and that we were not together. Has anyone ever thought about that? Because I do. Has anyone ever thought about the 1960s and the tumult that was going on in that time? Because I do. And I honestly, I mean, you compare this to the early 1800s, there is just simply no reason for us to stay united at this point. The only thing it will do is get us to be more riled up and potentially get more violent with each other. That is my honest opinion. And with that, I have articles to discuss. So thank you guys very much for joining. I just want to briefly remind you before we get to the articles. If you like this content and you're in the audience, please do throw that like button up or hit that like point to doing a new show if nobody's actually listening to it, right? Pretty interesting story for you here today. Let me go ahead to the get to the share screen, but you can kind of see the banner there at the bottom. Jesuit magazine America, which is a large, obviously American magazine that is published by Jesuits, is pushing pro-China propaganda. You did hear that correctly. The Jesuit magazine, which, by the way, remember, Pope Francis is a Jesuit. Remember that the Jesuits are kind of the paramilitary, in a way. A better word to be describing them would be Counter-Reformation wing of the Roman Catholic Church, right? They have this American magazine, America magazine, right? America, the Jesuit Review. And they are pushing forward not only pro-Biden propaganda, because they are pro-Biden, which is, to a certain extent, that's obviously a little bit expected. We know that Pope Francis is obviously leaning towards the liberal side of geopolitical sphere, or spectrum, rather. But within this article, we actually see a great deal of pro-China propaganda. In fact, what we see in this article is that China is actually very, very happy with the fact that we are going to see a president who is a little bit more friendly with China. As it turns out, the Vatican wasn't particularly happy with the fact that Donald Trump doesn't like China. The Vatican, you see, wants to make deals with China in the back room that end up selling out both its traditional Catholics and indeed everybody else who worships some sort of religion outside of this accepted Catholic sphere. And the fact that Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump had some things to say about their concentration camps and how bad this 2018 Sino-Vatican agreement actually was for Christians, that, that actually threw a little bit of a monkey wrench, so to speak, into the plans that the Vatican had. So they want to get a nice capitulating Neville Chamberlain-esque president in the White House, and the semi-sentient, bowl of pudding that is Joe Biden is providing that for them. So Trump and Pope Francis didn't see eye to eye, says this magazine, written by Drew Christensen on December 14th of 2020. Can Joe Biden find common ground with the Vatican? Oh, common ground. We just need to find common ground so that we can all be peaceful and love each other. Stupid. Of course, Joe Biden is a Catholic, so that is going to end up playing into whether or not they do find common ground. But nonetheless, let's just go ahead and get into the article here. Anticipation of a new administration in Washington prompts questions about the future course of U.S.-Vatican relations. There is much on which a Biden administration and the so-called Holy See can collaborate. President-elect Joe Biden and the grand blasphemous himself, Francis, share many policy concerns, above all climate change, where Mr. Biden pledged to rejoin the Paris Climate Covenant. Now, a couple things that are immediately worthy of note here. Notice they call it the Paris Climate Covenant, using that hyper-religious language. And we've seen this hyper-religious language emanating from the Catholic Church and specifically the papacy since the beginning of the Francis episcopate in 2013. He has been constantly pushing forward this idea that it is indeed the good Catholic thing to do to combat climate change and be a, quote, good steward of this planet. I am personally waiting for the inevitable infallible papal declaration that it actually is a matter of faith and spirituality to take care of this planet. I know for a fact that it's coming. And now, obviously, I say I don't know the future, right? So I can't literally say that. But it's just I'm so convinced that that will be the case. Because it's very obvious at this point. If it's not Francis, it'll be someone after Francis. I mean, well over half of the cardinals are Francis appointees, right? And it's just so obvious at this point that that's something he genuinely believes. That why would he not use his position as papal primate, as the Pontifex Maximus, the Vicarius Christi, all these other titles that the Catholic Church believes he has, right? Why would he not use this position to speak ex cathedra, right, and actually declare this is a matter of faith? He has the power to do it. He believes he has proper biblical, interpretation, and that's really all you need. It's just in a matter of time at this point, right? It's the same thing that you could have said in the 1700s about the Marian dogmas or papal infallibility. It's literally just a matter of time at this point. Also want to point out that, of course, they're talking about climate change. As we have said numerous times here on this program, I do believe climate change, and it turns out that there's some other things that might end up playing into it, specifically COVID-19. But I have said numerous times before, and I will continue to say, unless it is proven false, that climate change is going to be the catalyst by which we establish global government. And I want to make something perfectly clear here, right? We have gotten past the point of New World Order conspiracy theory. The vast majority of far left laity, not even talking about the politicians and the celebrities and people who are academics and all that, who we know agree with this sort of thing, right? But just talk to your far left liberal friends, right? Or even your slightly progressive liberal friends. And one thing you'll find is that the idea of global government is actually appealing to a lot of people. A lot of people think that open borders and getting rid of the concept of the nation state and getting rid of the concept of the ethnos, right, and replacing it with this one race, one world motif, they actually find that to be a good thing. They think that's progression. They think that's evolution. They think that's the next step in the human species in its walk towards, eventually exploring the planets like Star Trek. And honestly, I think climate change is, in their opinion, a perfect example of that. Once again, I bring up the raging atheist, right? And of course, he's just a YouTube liberal, right? Just like I'm just a YouTube conservative, right? Neither one of us are necessarily speaking for a bunch of people per se. But it's not like he's the only person who says this. I just mentioned him because he was speaking with me, right? And he points out how he actually believes that we need to come together and get rid of this concept of nationalism and establish a new global society, which may or may not already be established. It seems to me like he thinks that that's just the way it already is, and those of us who are nationalistic are just kind of living in the past, being like Luddites, basically. And he thinks that we're going to need to do that. This is what we're going to have to do in order to combat this global problem that is climate change. Of course, that's the entire purpose behind this Paris Climate Summit that they call the Paris Climate Covenant, with this religious language, right? So not only is this something that I very strongly believe will end up being the catalyst for global governance, but actually they believe it's something that will be the catalyst for global governance, and they support global governance at this point. And that is why I'm saying we need to understand we are past this point of, New World Order conspiracy theories, right? This is now the blatant and admitted goal of numerous different political groups throughout this world, including but not limited to American liberals. Returning to the article, the quote, Holy Father, absolutely hate these titles, his recent encyclical Fratelli Tutti addressed the need for solidarity in a post-pandemic world to relieve poverty and correct accelerating inequality. At some point, hopefully, it's going to be on a rabbit hole of rabbit holes over at Nicholas Proclaimer of Messiah's channel. By the way, shameless plug to that. Go ahead and check that out if you haven't done so. Hopefully, we'll actually be reading Fratelli Tutti, where you will see it is the most perfect example of the Marxism that is just pervasive, literally through the very veins of Pope Francis. Not literally, of course, but you know what I mean, right? Like just how strongly Marxist he really is, even if he doesn't use the exact term Marxism, right? Or if he would never call himself a communist per se. Oh, hang on, really quick. I just noticed my super awesome. Oh, not chill. 1 second. 1 second, friends. There we go. Needed that. I have my logo as a background. I wanted that to be the background. Anyways, returning to what I was doing. So we see in Fratelli Tutti, right, this very strong Marxism. We also see in Fratelli Tutti a very strong support for this what do they call that? The Great Reset, right? That the World Economic Forum has been pushing forward, which, by the way, it just so happens, and we covered this in previous Watchdogs. If you guys would like to check those out, I really need to get a editor like a Jamie to actually, pull those things up when I say this. But nonetheless, we did cover this on a previous Watchdog talking about the World Economic Forum, where we actually, discussed the fact that that Pope Francis is one of the contributors to the World Economic Forum and one of the big supporters of their so-called Great Reset. And of course, this is what he's talking about here, where he's saying we need solidarity in a post-pandemic world, right? Saying that we need to relieve poverty, and saying that we need to do this on some kind of a global scale, right? And of course, like I said, that's why I am thinking that, as it turns out, COVID-19 is going to be a much bigger part of this than I had originally anticipated, right? I did kind of think it would be strictly the coming together of religions in this UN for religions that seems to be still very behind the scenes, and then climate change, which was their sort of not behind the scenes thing. But now it turns out they have two different things that are very blatant and in everyone's faces to try and push forward some level of global governance. It is not only climate change, but also this COVID-19 crisis, right? So that's what we have there. Oh, I see. Brother Nicholas is actually in the live chat. Brother Nicholas, if you may, if you don't have the time, that's perfectly fine. But could you potentially find my World Economic Forum video and drop that into the live chat for the good people? If you don't have the time, perfectly okay. I just want to see if it's at all possible. But nonetheless, let's get back to the article at hand. Pretty sure we've already spent quite a bit of our time, about 25 minutes, it looks like. So at any rate, in announcing his new economic team, the president-elect, of course they refer to Biden, has likewise affirmed his intent to reduce economic inequality and empower workers, a perennial concern of Catholic social teaching. Now, of course, that is pretty interesting. Number one, that is a perennial concern of Catholic social teaching, quote unquote, which, as of course we've shown numerous times, both here on the Watchdog and on Rabbit Hole of Rabbit Holes, and also on a show by a minister named Chris Pinto, if you guys know anything about him, or James White's Dividing Line, if you know anything about him. Numerous other people have shown this as well. But this is actually very well known. At least the Jesuit branch of the Catholic Church just blatantly admits this, that social liberation theology is a huge portion of what they do, and that, doing things like, giving more power to the workers, wealth redistribution, reducing wealth inequality, things like that, right? Helping marginalized groups racially and in terms of gender, although it does seem that might be applying to now, the extra sexual genders that don't actually exist, and sexual orientations and things like that. I mean, who obviously knows? We'll see what happens. But the point is, that's been very admitted by the Jesuit side. It is interesting to see that they're now claiming that is just the entire Catholic social teaching, which, I guess to some extent is kind of true. I mean, you go back in history, JFK and Al Smith, right? These men are Catholics, and they are also Democrats who are supporting big government, and obviously not to the extent that we see in the modern age, but certainly to an extent that would cause most conservatives most true conservatives at least, to kind of cringe a little bit. One thing I do also want to note on here is that things like reduce economic inequality and empower workers are, in the end, buzzwords for Marxist agendas. So you guys just need to understand that, at least according to America Magazine, who definitely is going to have at least somewhat of an insight on this, considering the fact that they and the Pope come from the self-same secret order of weird, counter-Reformation Catholics. At least according to this one source, we are seeing that both the Vatican and the president-elect of the United States, Joe Biden, are at least using terms which also seem to be used by numerous Marxists all throughout the world, including in this very country. On numerous occasions, the Pope has demonstrated his concern for refugees and migrants. Mr. Biden has expressed his opposition to the Trump administration's harsh, even cruel treatment of Central American refugees at the U.S.-Mexico border, and his desire, to address the backlog of admissions and to regularize the asylum process. Now, of course, there's a whole bunch of rhetoric that's actually going into this. There are definitely things that the Trump administration has done that I disagree with. For example, the children in cages thing. Obviously, there is something that needs to be done when it comes to separating children from adults in this situation at the border, because very often you don't have any idea if they even are their parents, right? This is a very common trafficking technique. That's one of the biggest reasons why we separate adults and children in the first place. Also, you're not going to obviously put children in adult prisons. That just doesn't really make any sense. At the same time, though, perhaps something better than a dog crate. I don't know. I think that's not very difficult to ask for. And it's not like other conservatives haven't asked for that before, like Ron Paul, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, right? Etc. It seems to me like it should be a relatively easy thing to accomplish. It might cost you a little bit extra money, but so what, right? In the long haul, it's the most positive thing, both for the nation and from a humanitarian perspective. But that said, right, we do need to understand, and I was even, I press liberals on this all the time. We do need to understand there is something wrong with just allowing 22, potentially even as much as 40 to 50 million illegal immigrants just walk all over your system, especially when you consider the fact that a huge number of them are going to be human traffickers, are going to be drug traffickers, are going to be gangbangers, could potentially be terrorists, could potentially be money laundering, right? There's reasons why you have these kinds of laws. And also, of course, let's just note the fact that you don't want to have a massive influx of one culture into another culture that causes racial tensions and ethnic tensions and violence, right? It also causes the culture of the people who live there to be taken over, which obviously they're not particularly fond of usually. And you also don't want a massive influx of cheap menial labor, because that means that your citizens who would typically take those jobs no longer do take those jobs. And then, of course, they either become part of the unemployment group or become part of the welfare group, whichever group happens to take them in that regard, right? And of course, that there's numerous different things that would go into that as well. But the point is, the point is that when we see this problem, this illegal immigration problem, right? It is a problem that does need to be addressed. We can't just allow this to run wild on our system. It causes far too many problems, debt-wise, crime-wise, terrorism-wise, reducing menial labor. I mean, you just can't possibly function when you have this massive influx of people from another culture coming in undocumented. It doesn't work that way. It's never worked that way. It didn't even work that way in like the 4000s BC. Obviously, I'm exaggerating only slightly because we don't have history from the 4000s BC. But in antiquity, we do have lots of history of like massive influxes of refugees and other cultures coming into a certain area. Very often, the inevitable conclusion of these situations is the destruction of both cultures and mass amounts of violence betwixt the two. You can look at the Romans and their fightings with all the barbarian tribes as an example. But I digress on that. We want to get back to the article, of course. Then again, right, if you guys didn't want my commentary, you'd be watching this show somewhere else. Or not this show, but this information. You get what I'm saying. Anyways. The quality of potential collaboration between the Holy See, so-called, and the Biden administration will depend on the president-elect's choice of ambassador and the trust the president and the Secretary of State have in the appointee. The incumbent, Ambassador Callista Gingrich, was clearly a political appointee often overshadowed by her outspoken husband, former Republican Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. Which I don't necessarily disagree with. There's some truth to that. This is certainly a political appointment. At the same time, of course, I don't want anybody who's going to capitulate to the current Vatican. Frankly, I don't even think we should have an ambassador to the Vatican. I think it's preposterous that the United States government has an ambassador to a religious body, even if that religious body does also happen to be a nation state. But if we are to have an ambassador to the Vatican, and to have some sort of a diplomatic relation with them, then I definitely do not want someone who's going to capitulate to the current Pope. I don't want a globalist. I don't want somebody who wants this big kumbaya of religions. I don't want somebody who's pro-China. I don't want somebody who's going to try and push forward this UN agenda of global governance. I don't want it, right? And conservatives shouldn't want it. Americans shouldn't want it. Most people throughout the world shouldn't want it. If you live in the UK, you don't want that, either for the UK or for the United States. And I don't want it for the UK either, right? It's a bad thing. But nonetheless, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo used the embassy to the Holy See as a platform to hector Pope Francis about the 2018 Vatican-Beijing agreement on the appointment of bishops, ignoring the unity of the church and its internal governance. And this is where you start to get to the point where they're now, you see that the Vatican is starting to become a little bit frothy at the mouth with the idea that they might actually have a pro-putting people in concentration camps. A pro-Chinese president in office, right? Because that allows them to push forward their agenda without having any sort of a serious threat in the form of the Secretary of State or the President of the United States or the ambassador of the United States to the Catholic Church, calling them out on their BS, right? They love it. They're absolutely ecstatic that the semi-sentient bowl of pudding that is Neville Chamberlain, or excuse me, Joe Biden, sorry, I was wrong again, Kamala Harris, is going to be the President of the United States. They love it. And why do they love it? Because he's pro-China, and being pro-China melds very well with what the Vatican is trying to accomplish. And by the way, let's point out something real quick, as longtime watchers of the show will know, and as you can see either in past episodes of this show or on past episodes of A Rabbit Hole of Rabbit Holes, another plug of that there. This was not solely about the appointment of bishops. We don't know exactly what it was about because the document is currently kept secret and we can't read it. But what we do know is that it includes the appointment of bishops, the essentially recognition of the Catholic Church as the sole legal Christian authority and even legal monotheistic authority in China. And it discusses translations of the Bible because the Vatican did agree with China's pushing forward of a Chinese Communist Party edited Bible, right? And it, even though we don't know exactly what, included some discussions on the Vatican custodianship of cathedrals and other such holy sites in the nation of China. And there could be other things as well. Like I said, we haven't been seeing the document because the Chinese government and the Vatican are keeping it very secret. Those are only the things that we've been able to glean based off of what's happened as a result of this agreement, right? But when they're saying, oh, it was just on the appointment of bishops, it's nothing to worry about. That is a lie. And by the way, let's just go ahead and understand what the appointment of bishops is. It was the appointment, it was basically allowing the Vatican to not appoint its own bishops in China, but have the Chinese Communist government itself appoint those bishops, with, of course, the one caveat that the Vatican would agree to those bishops, as if they really had a choice, because the Chinese Catholic or the Chinese Communist Party would just do what it's always done and establish them as their own Chinese Catholic Church, right? That's been what they've been doing for the last 40, 50 some odd years at this point. So this agreement is a horrible thing. It sells out. And by the way, Pope Francis acknowledged this. Also a shameless plug for Rabbit Hole of Rabbit Holes. Pope Francis actually wrote in a letter to the Chinese Catholics, hey, we're very, very pleased with your guys' faith, and we admire your the fact that you've endured through all this persecution, but basically there's more of that coming. Sorry, not sorry. But for the greater good. Hope you understand. Bye. And I'm only paraphrasing slightly, I assure you. Go watch the Rabbit Hole of Rabbit Holes. We literally read the entire document verbatim. This is, so Pope Francis is acknowledging that he is selling out not only Protestants and Orthodox and Muslims and Jews and Falun Gong and other such monotheistic religions in China, but he is also freely acknowledging that he is selling out traditionalist Catholics and Catholics who do not want to capitulate to the Chinese Communist Party as a result of this Sino-Vatican agreement. And what is this Jesuit Review America pushing forward? Oh, it was just the appointment of bishops. Mike Pompeo was so mean. Doesn't he understand the delicacies of the situation? Like, shut up. Literally, shut up. You disgusting, sniveling snail. I hope you are salted. Man, I'm very sorry to get heated, friends, but I cannot help but get so frustrated with these evil, evil people. They know exactly what's going on. They know there's Falun Gong in concentration camps. They know there's Christians in concentration camps. They know that their Catholic brothers, forget the other Christians and the Muslims and the Falun Gong, their Catholic brothers are being killed by the Chinese Communist government. They know it. But do they care? No, because the Vatican wants its power. It wants power in China, and the only way it's going to get it is capitulating to these communist thugs. Anyways, where did I leave off? He preceded the denunciation with an article in First Things that carried the same message. It was an affront that publicly irked the Vatican, which pointedly noted that this kind of criticism is usually a matter of diplomatic exchanges rather than public attacks. In other words, couldn't you have kept it secret? Do you really have to call us out in public? And yes, we do. Okay, because you're evil. You're disgusting, in fact. You want to talk about draining the swamp? Drain that swamp. Calm down. All right. I can do this. I can get through this article without popping my top a second time. Man. I'm not going to lie. It's a little bit easier to not freak out when I do Rabbit Hole of Rabbit Holes because Brother Nicholas is there. And not only does he tend to have enough passion for the both of us, but he also, for whatever reason, keeps me nice and simmered. But anyways, forgetting those notes, let's just continue on. Mr. Pompeo proved insensitive. He's insensitive. Oh, what a crime. Insensitive to the delicacy of the Sino-Vatican relations and the Holy See's painstaking efforts over 2 whole decades towards an agreement. Like, are you for real? Dude, like, can you guys imagine if this sort of stuff, I brought up Neville Chamberlain numerous times. Could you imagine if this kind of stuff was pushed forward by Neville Chamberlain apologists back in early World War II days? For those of you who don't know, Neville Chamberlain is the guy who capitulated to Adolf Hitler in the early days before World War II, right before Hitler's own invasion of Poland, right? Could you imagine, like, how asinine that would sound if Neville Chamberlain apologists were saying, oh, well, you don't understand how hard we tried to make this deal with Hitler. I don't care. He's murdering millions of people and invading Poland. You moron. Like, cry in the corner somewhere. Like, literally, you're not relevant to this conversation. I hope this is entertaining to people because it's entertaining to me. He imposed his evangelical understanding of religious liberty. Apparently, guys, not wanting to get beaten over the head with clubs until dead and have your churches blown up and been run into concentration camps. Apparently, that's an evangelical understanding of religious liberty. Whatever. I mean, not like it's clearly, laid out in the United States Constitution that was not written by evangelicals, but, what do I know? Just a dude on YouTube. He imposed his evangelical understanding of religious liberty on the church's strategy of rapprochement with China, apparently not grasping that for the Catholic Church, in accordance with international law, which is bogus, corporate ecclesiastical matters relating to church unity and internal church governance are also matters of religious liberty, which is basically nothing. I mean, that sentence doesn't communicate anything, right? The fact of the matter is you are selling even your own Catholic brothers and sisters into persecution, into martyrdom, into damnation of the physical body, which unfortunately, if they do die in their sins, I must say is damnation of the spiritual soul as well. But I understand a lot of Catholics do genuinely have faith in Jesus Christ. And of course, that's more of a talk for the unapologetics, so we'll move on. But that's what we're talking about here. You can't just say, the religious, internal governance is part of religious liberty, and we're actually fixing that part. So, therefore, it actually, no, it doesn't help. Are people being persecuted because you let them or not? Are you allowing the Chinese government to get away with putting your Catholic brothers and sisters in a concentration camp? Yes or no? And if the answer is yes, then I do not give a shit, please excuse my French, about the fact that you think internal governance is somehow related to religious liberty. Bogus. Okay? I see your claim. I reject your claim. It's nonsense. Where did I leave off? I'm sorry. In his typical heavy-handed style, he tries to suborn the Vatican's tenuous tie to China in the service of the Trumpian Cold War with the Middle Kingdom. Which I don't know. There's nothing more to be said on that, I guess. You got to move on. Mr. Pompeo's false steps. They're false steps, which I don't even know what that means. Like, did he not actually take these steps? Like, what are you trying to communicate? But nonetheless, we see the rhetoric. Mr. Pompeo's false steps show why Vatican officials have long made known to U.S. interlocutors their preference for professional diplomats over politically prominent Catholics as potential ambassadors. And of course, this goes back, the very term layman is a Catholic term to basically degrade the populace as if they're somehow not as wise as us, what would you say that? Enlightened, knowledgeable, massively wise, right? All these other sort of things. I can't really think. My brain's not working at the moment, but you get the idea, right? We're the priests, and we have these mighty scriptures and the passed down from the apostolic tradition, right? And all this other stuff. And so we can be trusted with it. It's the same thing you see in the PhD circles today, right? Oh, well, I went into this Harvard University, and that means something. That name is relevant for some reason, as is the letters FUD behind my name for some reason, right? And that is going to be what we actually determine, how we actually determine, your merit, not your intelligence, anything you've accomplished, anything you might potentially accomplish, the fact that you're a human agent and actually have the capability to understand things, right? Sorry, we don't want that sort of thing. We want professional diplomats. Anyways, as long as one has a high tolerance for long ceremonial events, an appointment to the Vatican offers special potential for constructive diplomacy. Most other diplomatic appointments are simply bilateral, focused on issues with the host state. The Holy See's interests, so-called, by contrast, are global, and its various dicasteries treat a variety of multilateral global concerns from poverty to disarmament. I do want to note really quickly, and I'll be quick, but I have frequently noted both on this show and on Rabbit Holes that I believe it is going to become the norm that the Vatican doesn't necessarily have the exact same policy for each individual nation state, but that they doctor their policy for each individual nation state in order to give them the greatest number of power while also maintaining some level of good relations. And we used Israel and China as comparisons to see where they, where they coincide as far as what the Vatican goal is and where they diverge as far as how they are doctoring these policies to fit either specifically with Israel or specifically with China. Let it be known that American Magazine just basically admitted that that was true, right? By contrast, the Vatican's interests are global, and their various dicasteries treat a variety of multilateral global concerns from poverty to disarmament. Just noting, but moving on. Vatican City, moreover, because of the church's worldwide reach, is famous as a listening post for diplomats. Through its hierarchy and charities, the church reaches into social and political grassroots around the world in a way that often makes it an early warning system for popular concerns and a font of alternative viewpoints for diplomats tied down to their embassies and capital host cities. Gotta move forward here a little bit. I apologize, friends. With the presumed return of the United States to the world stage under Mr. Biden, as if we somehow left, the so-called Holy See, with its principal commitment to multilateralism, can also provide wise counsel on how to re-engage in global affairs without appearing overbearing. I mean, how preposterous, right? But also, What do they want the Vatican? They literally want the Vatican to operate as like a royal council for the United States president, which of course is very important considering the fact that, as I have noted numerous times, he is a semi-sapient bowl of pudding. I'm barely convinced he's the person at this point. Other states, including allies, have come to understand that that they must do more on their own with less reliance on the United States, which I actually completely agree with, to be fair. The self-reliance is a development that needs to be encouraged. At least we can agree on one thing. A dead clock is right twice a day, I suppose. Others fear the Biden administration might turn out to be a brief interlude between populist or at least more nationalist U.S. administrations. We can only hope. I certainly would hope that. Now, obviously, nationalist only if they're nationalist in the traditional patriotic American understanding and not in the European understanding of being, hugely totalitarian and ethnocentric. But I digress on that. The Holy See could be a quiet partner in advancing global policies and in supporting popular movements, a special concern of the Grand Blasphemous, while opposing populist ones. And the Grand Blasphemous, for those of you who are not reading along, which I assume is most, is Pope Francis. That's my little name for him. Sorry, I need to get a drink of water here real quick. My apologies, friends. And man, time is just flying. 51 minutes already. I don't know. Excuse me. I don't know that we'll actually be able to finish this entire thing. But that is, that is completely okay. In recent years, the Holy See has also been at the forefront of multilateral initiatives. In 2000, in conjunction with the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the Clinton administration, it led the way on Jubilee debt relief for the poorest nations under the heavily indebted Poor Countries Initiative. Pope Francis and his encyclical Laudato Si, also a very important one that hopefully we will read in full at some point, played an important role in the lead up to the 2015 Paris Climate Covenant. And in fact, it can be variously said to be the reason for the Paris Climate Accord. Likewise, the Holy See has been party over likewise, the Holy See, so-called, has been party over the last 3 decades, to a series of arms control initiatives on landmines, cluster munitions, and the small arms trade being firearms. Vatican diplomats, particularly Cardinal Silvano Tomasi, engaged with the Humanitarian Consequences Movement, a civil society initiative in conjunction with non-nuclear weapon states, examining growing knowledge of the effects of nuclear weapons and the inability of nations to recover from nuclear war. We were going to read more about this, but I always just way overestimate how much time I really have, so we'll do that tomorrow. I haven't actually spoken, by the way, fun fact, I haven't actually spoken with Brother Nicholas yet, but we will probably have at least one, if not 2 episodes of Rabbit Holes this week, so be on the lookout for those as well. At any rate, the movement set the stage for the 2017 treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons, which we will read in full tomorrow. The negotiations for that treaty, it's basically, just by the way, just so you know, it's basically just a reiteration of the Treaty for Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which we have actually read in the past, if you're interested in that episode. And Brother Nicholas, if you are in the live chat, if you could maybe drop that one in the live chat as well, I would appreciate that. And by the way, if when I send you on these errands, you like I said, if you just want to not do it, I perfectly understand that. It's just the only other person who has wrench privileges. That's why I constantly ask you when you're in the live chat. So I do appreciate your understanding. Anyways, the negotiation for that treaty opened with a message from Pope Francis, and the so-called Holy See was among the first state parties to sign and ratify the treaty. Yeah, remember that. The Vatican is a nation state. It is not just a religious body. I keep trying to stress that to people. A lot of people seem not to understand it. The TPNW, which is I believe the Treaty for Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, comes into force January 22nd, 2 days after Mr. Biden's inauguration. High among the multilateral issues on which the so-called Holy See in the United States can closely consult is nuclear disarmament. beginning this August with the postponed Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, which will be this August. We will be reporting on that again. That is the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference. Mark that in your calendars. August of 2021. It could be a bridge for the United States with non-nuclear states that support the treaty and with elements among wavering states currently under the U.S. nuclear umbrella. China, the civilizational state. So modest, but whatever. Both the United States and the so-called Holy See face a major challenge in forging relations with China. No doubt, China will remain a multifaceted problem for years to come. Unfortunately, U.S. foreign policy is subject to the vagaries and hyperbole of electoral politics. Surely it will help to reduce the demagoguery surrounding Sino-U.S. relations. And when they say reduce the demagoguery, they basically mean that they want us to be more friendly with China. They want us to not acknowledge the fact that they commit atrocities regularly, that they currently have people in concentration camps, that they're trying to establish themselves as the new global superpower, so on and so forth. They want us to just forget all that in the name of a great global kumbaya, which I am just not willing to sing. Much like China, the Vatican thinks in centuries, also very modest. In that spirit, the Holy See, so-called, has shown how persistence can succeed in relations with a wary China. Persistence is too little valued in the United States, which favors urgent action it soon forgets. To be fair, I actually agree with that. Likewise, the history of the Vatican's recent China policy shows how providing signs of respect can build a relationship. Of course, by signs of respect, they mean allowing the Chinese government to appoint your bishops and throw people who they disapprove of in concentration camps and make you register under their religious administration and edit your Bible, but whatever. Likewise, the history of the Vatican's recent China policy, blah, 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 just read that. The Chinese regard themselves as a civilizational state rather than a nation state. The Vatican, too, is the inheritor of 2,000 years of Christian civilization, which, of course, is false. The Vatican is not the inheritor of 2,000 years of Christian civilization. The Vatican did not exist when the apostles were around. It did not exist even at the time of Nicaea. The formation of the Catholic Church was a long process that can said to be, in a way, beginning right before Nicaea, because we do see the term Pope start to be thrown around in about the 290s, though it doesn't have quite the same meaning that it does today, and developing all the way until about 607 AD, with the Pope of that time declaring himself to be infallible and supreme. So it was a very long process, and it absolutely does not go all the way back to the apostles. That's the only people who believe that at this point are atheists who try to discount Christianity based on these facts, and Catholics who believe they are the sole inheritors of Christianity based on these facts. And by facts, just know I'm putting air quotes in facts. I know you guys can't see me, but I'm putting air quotes around when I say the word facts. Now, of course, the whole civilizational state is nothing more than pure ego. I mean, Ireland is obviously the inheritor of the Irish civilization. Israel is clearly the inheritor of the Hebrew civilization. Saudi Arabia is clearly the inheritor of the Arab civilization, along with Jordan. I mean, like, what does that even mean? Most nations on the planet are civilizational states. That doesn't mean you're not a nation state. It's just a way for you to try and, basically inflate your own ego. But I digress. Which I have been told that I say too much, but I don't know. It's a habit. At the same time, by affirming the validity of the Gospel's enculturation in different regions, the Gospels do not actually call for enculturation. That is a lie. Anyways, Pope Francis has legitimized a Catholicism with a Chinese face. Isn't that interesting? You guys should check out The Dividing Line, James White's Christian Apologist radio show, where he has recently talked about how China is trying to create how France is trying to create a Islam with a French face, right? And we have often put forward this idea, like I said earlier in this stream, that the Vatican is going to be, twisting their policies to fit with each individual culture. Well, once again, you see that freely and blatantly admitted. And if we take into account what's also going on in France with the Muslims, I think I can safely say that this will eventually apply across all nations and to all religions, and more than likely being done by a UN of religions, which will be established in the very near future. You guys, I just mark my words, right? They already want it. They're already moving forward with it. The vast majority of people who are on the left and the West actually approve of it. Like, it's going to happen. Just get familiar with the idea. Pope Francis has legitimized a Catholicism with a Chinese face. Blasphemous, but I digress. By inviting China to Vatican events and jointly sponsoring others, the so-called Holy See built trusted relations with the Chinese through both informal back-channel contacts and formal diplomatic conversations. The Chinese, went a little bit too far. The Chinese still revere 16th and 17th century Jesuit missionaries like Matteo Ricci and Adam von Schall as Westerners who genuinely respected the value of Chinese culture, which there have been many who were also like that. They're just trying to puff up Jesuits here, but nonetheless. Perhaps they see the Jesuit Pope as an heir to that historic cross-cultural encounter, which, to be fair, is probably true. Amid all the tensions between China and the West, it would behoove the Biden administration to choose some projects or events it can participate in that show respect for the civilizational state of China, not just for its historic legacy, but for the dramatic economic achievements of the last 40 years as well, which, of course, includes millions upon millions of bodies, but who's got time for that, right? The great economic achievements of China. Propaganda, friends. The Vatican is in the business of pushing Chinese propaganda. And on top of that, they are very ecstatic with the fact that we are currently about to inaugurate, at least seemingly, because I don't know if he actually has thoughts, a pro-Chinese president. Of course, it doesn't matter if he has the thoughts because Kamala Harris is pro-Chinese, I guess. So yeah, a pro-Chinese president. They love it. They're ecstatic at it. Ecstatic. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. Probably not. Anyways, perhaps they see blah, 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 blah. I just read. What am I leaving off here? Sorry, I'm trying to go a little bit fast here. In a climate of respect, renewed progress might be made on more difficult issues like human rights, religious liberty, and intellectual property, which is way more. I mean, those are the issues. I don't care about being your friend. I don't care about giving, you did so well. Good job, little Billy. China did such a good job. Yay. I don't care. Okay. You might have a pretty robust economy. Fantastic. And you guys also invented Kung Fu. Good for you. But you're murdering people in mass. So I don't give a damn. Okay. That is the only issue. Religious liberty, that is the only issue. Intellectual property, these are the only issues. There are no other issues. If you want pats on the back, go talk to your freaking grandma, for crying out loud. Sustaining a climate of encounter and creating a diplomatic culture that is prepared to receive signals of goodwill from the other side is vital to moving relations forward. That is particularly true in U.S.-China relations. Chinese policy is relatively Chinese policy is relatively more coherent. I can English, I promise. Relatively more coherent. So here they are praising China again, pushing that Chinese propaganda. U.S. policy formation is more subject to dissension from within its bureaucracy as well from electoral politics. Diplomats must be ready to read the signs of the times and seize the new openings offered them. We're almost done here. A trusting, engaged relationship between the United States and the so-called Holy See can be a major building block of the post-pandemic global order. There you have that great reset again, right? There you have them throwing this whole New World Order concept and global governance concept out for you, blatantly admitting it. It's not a conspiracy theory anymore. We're past that. That was like in the year 2000, right? A trusting, engaged relationship between the United States and the so-called Holy See can be a major building block for the post-pandemic global order Pope Francis has been urging the peoples of the world to embrace. But it will take an administration with a president, a secretary of state, and a Vatican ambassador in tune to the opportunities of this special relationship can make possible. And there you have it. There's other stuff that I wanted to get to, but we don't really have very much time. So, yeah, I mean, Jesuit magazines, Catholic magazines also, this isn't the only one that we've read. We've obviously read others in the past. They are pushing forward this propaganda of pro-China. Let's be friends with China. We can worry about religious liberties and the fact that they murder people in concentration camps later. That's just a known, no big deal. We'll just sweep that under the rug a little bit, and we'll be friends. And Joe Biden's going to do that, at least so they think. Kamala Harris probably is going to end up being the one who does it. In fact, I'm not going to lie, I have a little bit of a bold prediction. I don't know that Joe Biden is going to be alive in 2022. But I don't know. We'll see. They're very happy about it. They love it. They are very, very pleased with the developments in American politics, Chinese politics, and I personally am, I don't know, getting, I guess, a little hopeless. Like, if nobody's going to notice it at this point, or if they're just going to continue to say it's a good thing, then there's not a whole lot that we can do. There is another article here I wanted to read, but I'm not going to, so I'll just leave it in the description for you. Pope Francis's silence on Chinese persecution, where the Wall Street Journal, in an opinion piece, basically defends Pope Francis's decision to ignore all of the mass slaughterings going on in communist China. But nonetheless, that's the end of our program today, friends. I know it was super happy. I want to let you guys know, actually, that we are currently on Library as well, and we're going to start uploading videos to BitChute and Rumble. I point that out because I just recently had 2 videos taken down by YouTube for violating coronavirus policy. So we're not leaving YouTube, but just in case, we're going to make sure we have, not all of our eggs in one basket. So if you guys see the links in the description there later on tonight, please do check out my Library account, Rumble account, BitChute account, as well as all my different social medias, which are going to be Parler, Gab, Twitter, Minds, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find me with the tag The Synagogue on any of them, even if I do have a different display name on them. Also, if you guys do actually enjoy this content, please do like and share. Obviously, appreciate that. And also, please do subscribe if you actually appreciate this content. Ring that bell if you want to get notified of our content. Typically, Watchdogs are going to be posted live Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We did a Tuesday one here today because we didn't do one yesterday. And we're going to have Unapologetics posted on Saturdays and Sundays, the light version Saturdays, the full one on Sundays, with debates and open rooms posted kind of at random, and future shows eventually coming. So if you're interested in one of those things or all of those things, you can obviously note the days or ring that bell, subscribe here. We greatly do appreciate it. Lastly, if you are able to contribute monetarily, we obviously greatly appreciate that as well. I do aim on making this a career, and you can obviously see the Patreon there below my little icon. You can also find me with the tag The Synagogue there if you want to support this podcast on Patreon. I appreciate you guys very much. I appreciate any support you can give, whether that be the monetary or the likes, the shares, even the view time. I very much appreciate it. I appreciate you getting this information out to people. And I have a question for you before we leave. In the face of Armageddon, will you compromise?